I'm Julie Bartkey with this Senate update. On Thursday afternoon, the Senate passed two bills without any dissenting votes. The first, an early tax conformity bill, passed without any discussion or debate, and the second, a disaster relief package, also passed unanimously, but there was some discussion on the package.
Thank you, Madam President. I turn the members' attention to the handout that I've provided. You should find it on your desk. It shows a map of the state of Minnesota, and it points out the 37 counties and the 3 Indian reservations that were declared eligible for FEMA funds, totaling about $52 million. At this point, state funds are needed to provide the assistance program cost share required for the disaster. Now, after the storms, there were a lot of local entities that were wondering, does the $3 million that we put into the Disaster Assistance Contingency Fund last year provide enough coverage for the state's share of those damages? Now, in the past, we might have had to call a special session in order to do this, just like we did in 2010, 2012, 2013. And obviously, the $3 million that was in that fund is not enough to cover the 25% share that's available. But because of the timing, the state share of damages, we were able to slowly, as funds came in, utilize that $3 million. And it was enough to make sure that the repair work that was needed and it stayed on schedule and things were able to move ahead. So we were able to do this and hold on until we came to now where we are in this session. So what happens if a community sustains significant damages that are not eligible for federal disaster assistance? Well, that law also included a provision that gave the state direction and ability to account for those damages as well. So there are 3 counties that are not on this list: Dakota, Washington, and Morrison counties, and they will receive some relief from this action. There are also additional funds that are needed for our highways because they simply don't qualify for FEMA eligibility, but they do qualify for emergency funding through the Federal Highway Transportation Funding System. So we need to think about that. How are we going to take care of that? And the last thing in this bill that we talk about is some of the damage that was done to our land and conservation projects that are located in these counties that receive damage as well. And there is some federal funds available if we can come up with some state funds for that too. So that's what we're here to do today. We want to provide funds for our state share of FEMA eligible projects. We want to provide a match so we can get our roads and bridges that don't qualify for FEMA some funding, and we're going to provide funding for the Board of Soil and Water Resources so that we can make sure that the land and those projects are taken care of as well. So how are we going to do that? So now I turn your attention to the last handout, and it's the fiscal note. Section 1 in this bill transfers $9.6 million into the contingency account. Section 3 appropriates $3 million into the Transportation Department so that they can apply for those federal highway funds. Section 4 appropriates $2.4 million to the Board for Water and Soil Resources so that we can handle the conservation aspect. And then Section 2 is where we are canceling and transferring unexpended amounts from disaster legislation that has happened in the past. So this unexpended money would be canceled and transferred then into the contingency account. And with all that equaled, and we look at the fiscal note, we're left with $2.2 million that would be transferred from the general fund into that account to meet the match, the $14 million that we need to take care of this disaster. Now, if you sat in on the Finance Committee, when I presented the bill in the Finance Committee, this looks a little bit different. And I can tell you what happened is the 9.6, when we looked at that, There was a duplication in the 2011 unexpended amounts. We had to back that back out, and that's why you see 2.2 at the bottom line in the general fund. Madam President, I am honored to bring this bill to this body and be part of and participate in one of the most fundamental things that we do, and that's to help our local communities recover from disaster. So I'm asking for your support on this bill, and we'll stand for questions.
Is there any discussion on Senate File 1? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Jensen, you mentioned 3 counties, Dakota, Washington, and I didn't catch the 3rd county that wasn't receiving funds, but if you could just give me that county.
Senator Jensen.
Madam President, Senator Anderson, it is Morrison.
Is there any more discussion? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question for Senator Jensen, if she would yield, please.
Senator Jensen, she will yield. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Jensen, I'm wondering about the situation in which there's a county with a large populated center, but there may be smaller towns or areas in that county. And in some cases, the small town could actually be totally wiped out by a flood, and yet perhaps not qualify for aid because it doesn't meet the threshold. I believe it's on a county basis. And I'm wondering if you could talk to that a little bit, and how we might be able to assure that even small populated areas in our state that might face severe disaster would be able to secure the federal funding.
Senator Jensen.
Madam President, that's the great thing about what we did when we passed MS 12B last year. Included in that was the establishment of the Disaster Assistance Contingency Fund. It also included information and guidelines so that the state could take a look at criteria that you're talking about that don't meet the limits that they would qualify for FEMA, or they get declined for whatever reason, that they then can use this process through the state, and the state declare it a disaster and have those funds available. That is what Dakota, Washington, Morrison County did, is utilized that process that we put into place last year.
Are there any other questions? Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will give Senate File 1 its 3rd reading.
Senate File Number 1, a bill for an act relating to financing and operation of state government, providing deficiency funding for disaster assistance.
Is there any more discussion? Senator Pratt. What's the mics?
There we go. Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to say I'm in support of Senate File 1 to appropriate relief funds to our communities damaged by the flood. And it's easy, and it's hard to remember, but the fact of the matter is this flood happened back in June. And so we've been able to go without a special session thanks to the set-aside that we did last year. But it's also important to remember that this is a very bare-bones bill. And there are a lot of unmet needs in our communities, and I can speak specifically for Scott County, that aren't being met. Needs that the state has helped out and aided communities and counties in the past, most recently the Duluth flood of 2012. And so just to inform the body that Senator Dahl and I are working on a supplemental flood relief bill, looking at past precedent and what could be covered, but it's also important to make sure that we free up the FEMA match funds to our communities so that we can keep those projects going. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of this bill. every one of the counties that I'm honored to serve in District 23 is in this bill and was affected by this flood. I'd like to just have a shout out to the emergency management team that came to the rescue of these small towns, these communities. And as Senator Pratt said, there is a lot of work still going on, and they need our support, so please support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam President, and I too rise in support of this bill. However, I do have a question if Senator Jensen would yield for a question.
Senator Jensen, will you yield for a question? She will yield. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam President. And Senator Jensen, you talk about the contingency fund, and I think that's really good planning on the Senate and House's part to put some dollars aside for these natural disasters that we seem to always have, either in the spring or in the fall, heavy rain, whether it be frozen lines that collapse. We all know what we're talking about. It hits our whole state at different times, and I think it's good planning. Do you know if there's going to be anything moving forward as far as filling that fund back up, and do you know what the cap will be, or is there any talk about that moving forward in the future? Because I think it's a good idea to have that. So like you had stated earlier, we don't have to come back to a special session. It makes good sense. Do you know if there's going to be any money going back into that fund somehow?
Senator Jensen.
Madam President, Senator Ingebrigtsen, part of that bill that we passed also included a requirement that the Commissioner of MMB take a look at what's in the contingency fund and make appropriations and at least have that discussion and make sure that we're looking at what needs to go into that. And I know during the Finance Committee that the Chair of Finance discussed that and said that they would be taking a look at that then.
Senator Cohen.
Madam President, Senator Ingebrigtsen, I don't know if you were present for the brief discussion in Finance, but the intent all along was to fully fund the contingent account during the regular session this year during the appropriations process. And you might recall last year, just in the mix of what we had with the supplemental finance bill, money to the reserve and so on, that that account was not fully funded. And that was when I was working on the legislation with Representative Pawlowski. We had those discussions that we weren't sure we'd fully fund that contingent account, assumed we would do it this year during the regular appropriations process.
Is there any more discussion? Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam President. Question I have, would Senator Jensen yield for a question?
Senator Jensen will yield. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam President. The question I have is the criteria for the expenses on the local units the same criteria that has been used for other entities in previous disaster situations such as Duluth?
Senator Jensen.
Madam President, Senator Kiffmeyer, I am not aware of the criteria that was used specifically by the department to designate the $1.4 million to the 3 counties that will receive relief and funding.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam President. If Senator Jensen is not aware, is there another member of the body that can answer my question?
Senator Kiffmeyer, maybe you need to direct your question to someone else. Oh, Senator Jensen? Senator Jensen.
Madam President, I would like to ask Senator Kiffmeyer a question.
Will you yield, Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yes, Madam President.
She will yield. Senator Jensen.
Are you talking about the FEMA eligibility?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
I'm sorry, Madam President, I did not catch
the
that.
FEMA eligibility.
Well, Madam President, my question was a little broader than that. It was just the state criteria for our funding of disaster needs in the local units of government. I mean, I think what we want is that all of our counties can count on a fair and equitable distribution and the fair and equitable criteria for these kinds of disasters because it's state money and they all should have an equitable distribution. And so it just is the state criteria the same. I didn't think it was that difficult.
Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the clarification, Senator Kiffmeyer. This is a new program. It was established last year. So this is the first time that the criteria has been used, and it's a criteria that's going to be used going forward according to the legislation in MSB 12 that we passed last year.
Thank you, Madam President. I think, though, it
Senator
only... Thank you, Madam President. It just only introduces another question. If it's a new program and we cannot measure that criteria, but I will continue to ask further of staff. Thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam President. I may be able to help Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Kiffmeyer, that is exactly the point of the supplemental bill. The idea was that we need to get the FEMA match out in order to keep the projects running. But there are a number of unmet needs where we do have criteria that we've applied in the past. And so Senator Dahl and I are working with the BWSR, looking at the projects that they have submitted by the counties to make sure that those projects that meet that criteria do come in front of this body.
Is there any more discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on Senate File 1. Secretary will close the roll. There being 65 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.